Welcome to the Deep Dive. You know we love taking those fascinating sources that you share with us.
Absolutely.
And really pulling out those key insights just for you, making sure you don't have to wade through it all yourselves. And today, we got some pretty striking predictions about the world, and specifically Poland.
Okay.
Looking ahead to 2026.
2026. Wow.
Yeah, so we're diving into a YouTube video. It's called, and get ready for this, Świat I Polska W 2026 Roku Widziana Juło
All right.
by Krzysztof Jackowski.
Okay.
And you can find this on the Jasnowidzi Krzysztof Jackowski official channel. So we're going to unpack the main predictions, concerns, what might this year hold.
I'm ready. Let's get into it.
All right. What really jumps out at you right from the start?
Well, right off the bat, this feeling of a bad direction, He just comes out and says the world is heading in a bad direction.
Oh.
It's like, okay, that sets the stage, doesn't it?
It really does. It's such a broad statement.
Yeah.
But it just casts this shadow, I think, over everything that follows.
A sense of foreboding almost.
Yeah, for sure. So let's break down what's feeding this bad direction feeling.
Yeah, let's get specific.
Right. And one of the first things that comes up, geopolitically speaking, is a possible strike on Iran by the U.S. and Israel.
Right.
And, the speaker in the video, he kind of suggests there's this assumption that Russia would just, allow this to happen.
Right, just stand back.
But he doesn't buy it.
No.
He's really emphasizing that Putin is unpredictable.
You never know with Putin, do you?
And he even kind of hints at, these attempts to, I guess you could say, woo Putin.
To get him on side.
From the U.S. And it's interesting because he mentions both the Biden administration and potentially even a future Trump administration.
So across the political spectrum there.
Yeah. But his point is, even with all that, it's not a guarantee.
No guarantees with Putin.
No.
And that doubt about Russia's cooperation, I mean, that's fascinating. You can see that play out historically, right?
Oh, yeah.
Russia has this way of using its position in the Middle East to push back against the West.
Totally. Think about, like, the Cold War. Right.
Exactly. The Soviet Union backing Arab states, and that made things tricky for the U.S. and the region.
Yeah.
Complicated their foreign policy, for sure.
Yeah, and, he even talks about this hope that Putin will be, a man of honor towards Iran.
Right.
Given, it's interesting how he sees Israeli actions.
Okay. How does he view those?
With U.S. backing, of course.
Yeah.
But it really shows you there's this distrust.
A real lack of trust in Western approaches in that part of the world.
Absolutely.
It's palpable.
Yeah. Yeah, and then things get really interesting with his predictions about Ukraine.
Okay. Lay it on me.
All right, so he's envisioning that by 2026. Ukraine's going to be divided.
Divided?
Yeah, into 3 distinct zones.
Oh, wow.
One under full-on Russian occupation, another that's under Russian influence, but not totally occupied.
Okay, so like a buffer zone almost?
And then a third part that remains as Ukraine.
A 3-part Ukraine.
And he also gets this very strong feeling about casualties.
Oh, no.
Specifically in the Donetsk region.
That's already seen so much fighting.
Yeah, really high casualties is what he's seeing.
Now, if you zoom out and look at the bigger picture, I mean, dividing Ukraine like that, that's redrawing the map of Europe.
Huge implication.
Right. And the stability, the sovereignty of the entire region.
Everything's up in the air.
It really throws things into question. And then that focus on Donetsk, even with Russia already in control there, it's like he's anticipating either more intense fighting or maybe Russia really trying to solidify its hold on that region.
Yeah, maybe a power grab.
Something like that.
Okay, well, let's bring things a little closer to home.
Right, back to Poland.
So when he's looking at Poland in 2026, he gets this real sense of unease.
Oh, interesting.
And he lumps Poland in with, he says, 2 or 3 other Southern European nations.
Okay.
And he says their future is very uncertain.
Uncertain in what way?
Well, he clarifies that he doesn't think Poland's going to disappear as a country.
Right.
But he's talking about its future allegiances,
Ah.
its sphere of influence.
So who it aligns with.
Exactly. Like, where does Poland belong?
Yeah, who's pulling the strings, so to speak.
Right.
That ambiguity is really key here.
Yeah.
It's not about Poland vanishing. It's about this question of belonging. Like you said, where does it fit in? Who has influence over it?
Yeah, and it makes you think, is it about pressure from neighbors?
Yeah.
Maybe stronger countries?
Possibly.
Or even, how Poland fits into the whole European security setup.
It's like its role is being renegotiated somehow.
Right, like maybe the terms are changing.
Exactly.
And then He gets even more specific about Poland in the summer of 2026.
Oh, what's he seeing?
Okay, so first, he's predicting a significant drought.
Drought, that's never good.
And then a massive, long-lasting forest fire.
Oh, wow.
He uses this phrase, "Potuna ilość przestrzeni lasu."
So a huge amount of forest is going up in flames.
Yeah.
That's a stark image, isn't it?
It's really intense.
Poland facing these environmental challenges alongside all the geopolitical uncertainty.
Yeah, it's like a double whammy.
It makes you wonder, what would that do to the country?
Right.
Economically, socially.
The ecosystem, yeah.
Big repercussions for sure.
So let's shift gears back to the Middle East for a minute.
Okay.
Because he predicts a retaliatory attack on Israel.
Oh, no.
And it gets pretty specific.
What's he saying?
He's talking about what he calls chemical-like weapons.
Chemical weapons?
Yeah, and this attack, he says, would come after a potential strike on Iran by the U.S. and Israel.
So a tit-for-tat scenario.
Right, and his reasoning is Iran would see this as an existential threat.
Right.
Like their very survival is at stake.
I can see how they might reach that conclusion.
Yeah, and he's saying they wouldn't care about international opinion.
At that point, it's all about survival.
They'd respond with everything they've got.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. He even says this could all happen sooner.
Sooner than 2026?
Maybe even 2025.
Oh, wow.
With lasting consequences.
Yeah, that accelerates the timeline significantly.
It really does.
And the potential use of chemical weapons.
It's a whole other level.
Absolutely. It raises the stakes dramatically.
And speaking of consequences, he's also predicting major migration.
Migration? From where?
From Israel to Europe.
Oh, wow.
Including Poland. And he sees this as a direct result of this conflict.
Makes sense, unfortunately.
Sadly, we've seen this happen time and time again.
Yeah. Throughout history.
Yeah.
Conflict, instability.
It pushes people to seek safety elsewhere.
And if Israel were to be attacked in such a way, it's plausible, isn't it, that some would look for refuge in Europe.
Including Poland.
And it fits with what he was saying earlier about Poland's uncertain future.
Right.
Like, what happens when all these people start arriving?
Yeah.
How does that change things?
And he really digs deeper into that uncertain future for Poland.
Okay.
He starts talking about this idea that stronger countries, maybe those who've offered aid or security, they might start demanding something in return.
Something in return? Like what?
He uses the phrase property rights or something.
Property rights. That's interesting.
Yeah. And he straight up connects this to a new modern colonization.
New modern colonization. That's a loaded term.
It really is.
What do you think he means by that?
Well, he even brings up this example of Trump allegedly pressuring Ukraine.
Trump and Ukraine.
To allow the U.S. to exploit their rare earth minerals.
Oh, wow.
As an example of this, appropriation to us.
So even during wartime, this idea that powerful nations might take advantage.
It's a pretty heavy accusation.
Whether it's true or not, it definitely feeds into this narrative of, exploitation, lack of real partnership.
And he doesn't shy away from saying that this new modern colonization is happening now.
That's a bold statement.
It's not about armies and flags anymore. It's about economic leverage, political influence.
Security dependencies even.
Yeah. And, he keeps coming back to this feeling that in 2026, that sense of security in Europe and in Poland specifically, it's going to be even worse than it is now.
Even worse. Wow.
And he also predicts a big crisis.
Another crisis.
Yeah, starting in the Western world.
Okay.
Especially the U.S. And he gives a time frame.
A time frame.
Around April of this year.
That's just around the corner.
So multiple things happening at once, right?
Yeah.
Geopolitical instability, a potential economic downturn.
And this feeling of, things falling apart.
Of safety just eroding.
It's a pretty grim outlook.
And then he drops this prediction that is so striking.
Okay, what is it?
He talks about this vision he had.
A vision?
Yeah, and it's really unsettling.
Tell me.
He sees foreign troops.
Foreign troops where?
In Poland.
In Poland.
Non-Polish troops.
Okay.
And they're entering and occupying a part of Poland.
Occupying.
Near the Kaliningrad border.
Kaliningrad, that's a sensitive area.
It is. And here's the really strange part.
What?
He says it happens without any fighting.
Without any shots fired?
No resistance, no nothing.
So they just walk in?
It's like they're just allowed in.
That's bizarre.
And he describes it as this stalemate, like nobody knows what their intentions are.
So just this eerie presence.
And he even admits, he's like, I could hardly believe this myself.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to wrap your head around.
A silent occupation, essentially.
It's a very strange prediction.
It's totally out of left field.
Foreign troops just appearing in Poland.
And nobody doing anything about it.
Without a fight.
It's almost like a scene from a movie.
It's surreal.
Yeah. But then he brings us back to Ukraine.
Okay.
And he's sharing his take on Russia's goals there. He thinks Putin's aim is to weaken Ukraine.
Weaken it? How?
By taking territory, obviously, but also by essentially creating two separate Ukraines.
Two Ukraines?
Yeah, with Russia controlling at least one part.
So back to that earlier prediction.
Yeah, about Ukraine being divided.
It's a way to maintain control, influence,
and keep Ukraine from being this unified force.
Diminish its power on the world stage.
And then he brings up this interesting figure, Peter Thiel.
Peter Thiel, the tech investor.
Yeah, and he describes this whole philosophy that Thiel supposedly has.
Okay.
It's about flattening everything.
Flattening everything.
Politically, economically.
Still leveling the playing field.
Well, not in a good way.
Okay.
He calls it creating a political fascism.
Political fascism.
Yeah, but he clarifies it's not like jackboots and marches and all that.
Right.
It's more subtle.
So what is it then?
He's saying it's a system where security becomes dependent on.
Dependent on?
Money, basically.
So you pay for your protection.
And you're obligated to whoever's providing it.
That's a pretty bleak view of the future.
And he goes on to say that if the U.S. goes down this path...
The flattening path.
Yeah, they'll lose their allies.
That's a bold prediction.
And he's suggesting that the U.S. strategy is all about profiting from their military strength.
By making weaker nations dependent.
Exactly.
And where does that lead?
He's saying it leads to a breakdown.
A breakdown of what?
Of international order or financial systems.
Chaos, essentially.
And he even claims that Trump
again?
Made the decision to go this route.
To pursue this flattening policy.
Influenced by powerful people, of course.
The puppet masters.
And he says this is why global war is unavoidable now.
Because of this policy.
Because Russia and China, they see what America's doing.
They see this shift in alliances, the new approach.
And they're not going to just sit back and watch.
So it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
America's actions are pushing everyone towards conflict.
And he's specifically saying that Poland and some other countries, they've been designated as colonial.
In the sense that they'll be subservient to U.S. interests.
Colonial, wow.
Yeah.
It's like being relegated to a lower status.
And he suggests that this goes beyond just alliances. It's more like,
subjugation.
And then he throws in this last bit about Russia and America.
Okay.
He says there's this perceived agreement between them.
Agreement about what?
That a strike on Iran, especially if the U.S. is involved, would be the signal for a major global war.
The trigger point?
And Russia would jump right in.
Wow.
Now, he does say this comes from an unverified source.
So take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah, someone in the chat, apparently.
But still, he felt it was worth mentioning.
It shows how worried he is about things escalating.
Absolutely, that potential for a local conflict to blow up into a global one.
That's the real fear here.
And it's interesting how he connects all this back to what happened a few years ago.
Yeah, he goes way back.
Back to around 2020.
And he really lays out his belief that the Western world experts, this whole propaganda machine.
Propaganda?
Yeah, he even says figures from film and music were involved.
Wow.
That they were all working against their own people.
Against their own people.
Starting in 2020. And he's specifically talking about,
the pandemic.
Yeah, that whole health crisis.
So he's questioning the official narrative there.
Big time. He even describes what happened from 2020 to 2022 as a tragic circus.
A tragic circus.
And he keeps pointing out how the name of the illness was just constantly repeated.
Like it was drilled into our heads.
Yeah, and he says 2019, that was the last normal year.
The last normal year, wow.
And he makes this interesting observation that the focus on the pandemic just vanished when the war started.
It's true. The attention shifted dramatically.
He even jokes that maybe Putin orchestrated the whole thing.
To distract from the pandemic.
Yeah, and it's obviously sarcastic.
Right.
But it highlights how jarring that shift was.
It was a sudden change of focus.
From one crisis to another.
He's asking, is the world really normal now?
Especially with, the U.S. seemingly criticizing its allies.
Right. There's still this underlying tension.
And he's saying, as long as the fighting in Ukraine stays contained, there's a certain level of safety.
Okay.
But he brings up a second conflict.
What conflict?
What's happening in Israel and, the situation with Iran.
Right.
He says that could change everything.
It could tip the scales.
And then he talks about this feeling of betrayal.
Betrayal by who?
By the West.
Okay.
And he remembers these people he calls agitators.
Who instilled fear
during the pandemic.
Yeah.
But he also praises those who stayed logical.
Who questioned things.
Those who spoke out.
Went against the grain.
And he's thinking about that manipulation he felt during the pandemic.
Okay.
And what its objectives were.
And what its lasting effects might be.
Things we haven't even seen yet.
So a lot of distrust lingering from that period.
And this idea that we're still dealing with the fallout.
It's like a wound that hasn't fully healed.
Yeah.
And it makes it hard to know who to trust now.
Exactly. And he really emphasizes that.
That we don't know who's on our side.
It's hard to tell friend from foe.
And what the stakes really are.
And he even suggests this link between Trump and Putin.
Trump and Putin, again.
Regarding a conflict. And it's vague, but it seems like he's talking about something that happened during the height of the pandemic.
Okay.
When the propaganda was strongest.
So he's saying there was some kind of coordination.
Or at least they both benefited from the timing.
From the distraction of the war.
Right, because everyone's attention shifted so suddenly.
It's an interesting theory.
And he's suggesting that, maybe part of the world was rebelling.
Rebelling against what?
Against the actions of certain entities.
Like governments.
Yeah, during the pandemic.
Interesting.
He's really critical of governments.
In what way?
For shutting down businesses, making it hard to get health care.
A lot of people felt that way.
He even uses the term ghetto to describe the global situation.
Ghetto, wow.
And he believes the decisions made before 2020, they were a threat to people.
So it wasn't just the pandemic itself.
It was what led up to it.
The groundwork that was laid.
And then he brings up this concern about AI.
Artificial intelligence.
Yeah, and how it's replacing skilled professionals.
Lawyers, doctors, those kinds of jobs.
And he sees this as connected to that whole circus from before.
To the pandemic and the aftermath.
It's like one disruption feeding into another.
And he doesn't paint a rosy picture of AI, does he?
No, he's definitely worried about it.
And then he brings up a neutron bomb.
A neutron bomb.
Yeah, as an analogy.
For what?
For this war he sees happening.
The one that started before the actual war?
Yeah, maybe even with that wave of refugees coming into Europe. Refugees.
And he's asking, was this influx intended to disrupt Europe?
To destabilize things?
Or are those migrants going to share the same fate as everyone else?
After everything that's happened since 2020,
right.
That neutron bomb analogy is pretty powerful.
That's a striking image.
Destroying life, but leaving the buildings standing.
It's almost like he's saying the real target is society itself.
The fabric of our lives.
And he brings things back to Poland, talking about disagreements, political divisions.
Okay.
But he zeroes in on something specific.
What's that?
The process for approving medications in Poland.
Interesting.
And he mentions this politician who asked some questions about it.
But nobody paid attention.
Just got swept under the rug.
So it's back to that feeling of, things being hidden,
right.
The truth being obscured.
And he keeps saying, the world hasn't been normal since 2020. He brings up those terror attacks in Europe.
Oh, yeah.
And he suggests that some of those migrants, they might have been part of organized groups.
So a threat hidden among those seeking refuge.
It's scary to think about.
It is.
And he says there could be attacks in Europe.
Attacks?
Maybe coinciding with a strike on Iran.
So chaos erupting on multiple fronts.
Fueled by, calls for holy war.
Exploiting religious fervor.
And his biggest worry is that all this manipulation.
From the media, from politicians.
Since 2020, he thinks it's made people vulnerable.
Unable to see the danger.
Exactly.
Blinded by the propaganda.
And he shares this very specific example.
An example of what?
It's in Shucho.
Okay.
There's a mortuary there.
A mortuary.
With this, he says, disturbing inscription.
What does it say?
He doesn't actually say.
Oh.
But he uses it as a symbol of this manipulation.
Of the hidden agendas at play.
And he's saying, we need to be scared.
Really scared.
Really scared.
By the events of the past few years.
And by our lack of control over them.
Our lack of agency.
And he ends by talking about how products are becoming globalized.
Globalized.
Like how bottled drinks are the same everywhere.
Right.
Or restaurant menus.
Standardized, yeah.
And he sees this as a sign of vulnerability.
Vulnerability, how?
That we're all becoming so interconnected.
Oh, we're all susceptible to the same threats.
And he finishes by saying he doesn't feel like there are any true friends among nations anymore.
A bleak outlook.
It is.
A lack of trust on the world stage.
And he's basically saying we all need to be a lot more cautious.
So let's recap.
Yeah.
We've gone deep into Krzysztof Jackowski's predictions.
For 2026.
And it's a picture of instability.
Geopolitical, economic, environmental.
Multiple crises brewing.
He sees Ukraine potentially divided.
Poland's future is uncertain.
There's a massive forest fire in Poland.
An attack on Israel with these chemical-like weapons.
And even that unsettling image of foreign troops just appearing in Poland.
Near Kaliningrad.
And throughout it all, he keeps circling back
to the events of 2020.
The pandemic, the lockdowns.
And he sees it as a turning point.
A point where things went off the rails.
And he's saying, we're still living in the shadow of that.
It's affecting everything that's happening now.
And shaping the future.
It's a lot to process.
It is.
And, you know, it makes you think about what we need to be prepared for.
Yeah.
What shifts in alliances, in national sovereignty?
Are we heading for a world where countries have less and less control?
And how do those reflections on the pandemic,
on that whole period of disruption,
how does that inform our understanding of what's happening now?
It raises a lot of questions, doesn't it?
It really does.
And not a lot of easy answers.
Well, thank you for going on this deep dive with us.
It's always a pleasure.
And thanks for sharing this fascinating and slightly terrifying source material. We'll see you on the next one.